The phone call wasn't supposed to go through. Sarah had pressed Donald's number 3 times already that morning, each attempt sending her straight to voicemail as waves of nausea rolled through her body. She was 12 weeks pregnant after 6 years of failed fertility treatments, and the morning sickness had become so severe she could barely stand. All she wanted was to hear her husband's voice, to have him tell her it would be okay, that this suffering meant their miracle baby was growing strong inside her. On the 4th try, the call connected. Relief flooded through her even as she stumbled toward the bathroom. Phone pressed against her ear. "Donald." Her voice came out weak, strained. "I'm so sick. I can barely keep water down. Can you come home early? I just need. Don't bother me with such trivial things." His voice cut through her plea like a blade, sharp and dismissive in a way she'd never heard before.
I'm busy, Sarah.
"Handle it yourself." The words stunned her into silence. She stood frozen in the hallway of their home, one hand pressed against the wall for support, trying to process what she'd just heard. This was the man who had held her through every failed IVF cycle, who had promised her they were in this together, who had cried with her when the doctor said their last embryo had taken. And now he was calling her pregnancy symptoms trivial? She opened her mouth to respond, to ask what was wrong, but no sound came out. The line hadn't disconnected. She could hear breathing, movement, the rustle of fabric. And then another voice, sweet and syrupy, feminine and far too intimate. "Welcome back to Urban Folks TV channel. Before we continue with this story, let us know in the comment section where you are watching from. And if you are new here, hit the like and subscribe button to get notified whenever we drop a video." "Donald, what if someone finds out what you're doing?" Sarah's blood went cold. Every muscle in her body locked. She pressed the phone harder against her ear, her other hand moving instinctively to her stomach where their child grew, where her suffering, her sacrifice, her miracle was supposed to be happening. The nausea forgotten, she waited, barely breathing. Donald laughed, actually laughed. The sound was light, carefree, nothing like the tense, distant man he'd been for months. No worries, that foolish woman is still thrilled, thinking it's her own child. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Sarah's feet. She sank down against the wall, sliding until she sat on the cold hardwood. Phone clutched in a death grip. Foolish woman. Her own child. The words echoed in her head, refusing to make sense even as their meaning crashed over her in devastating waves. "Angela, you didn't want to endure pregnancy, so I switched her eggs with yours and did IVF." Donald's voice continued, casual, matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing dinner plans instead of destroying Sarah's entire world. "When the child is born, I'll lie and say the baby died, then divorce her. Then the 3 of us will live happily together. That woman is nothing more than a surrogate tool." Sarah couldn't breathe, literally couldn't pull air into her lungs. 6 years. 6 years of hormone injections that made her body swell and ache. 6 years of invasive procedures, of hope and crushing disappointment. 42 rounds of IVF. She'd counted every single one. The financial devastation as they drained their savings, maxed out credit cards, taken loans from her parents. The physical toll that had aged her a decade. The emotional destruction of watching her body fail month after month after month. And it had all been a lie, a manipulation, a scheme. The baby growing inside her wasn't even hers. It was Angela's. Some woman named Angela who apparently didn't want to deal with the inconvenience of pregnancy but had no problem stealing Sarah's husband, her life, her future. The phone slipped from her numb fingers, clattering against the floor, but she could still hear them. The sounds that came next made her stomach heave for reasons that had nothing to do with morning sickness. Soft laughter, intimate whispers, the unmistakable sounds of a kiss deepening into something more. She didn't know how long she sat there. Time seemed to fracture, moments stretching and compressing until she couldn't tell if seconds or hours had passed. The nausea returned with a vengeance, sending her scrambling to the bathroom where she vomited until there was nothing left. Her body was trying to reject something, she thought dimly. Maybe it knew before her mind did that she was carrying a lie. When she finally pulled herself up from the bathroom floor, something had shifted. The initial shock and devastation had crystallized into something colder, sharper. She picked up her phone from where it had fallen, noting that the call had ended at some point. 37 minutes. She'd listened to her husband betray her for 37 minutes. Her hands were steady as she opened her contacts, scrolling until she found the number for her obstetrician's office. "I'd like to schedule an appointment," she said when the receptionist answered. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, flat and emotionless. "For an abortion." The words hung in the air. The receptionist's response was gentle, professional, asking questions about her decision and whether she needed counseling resources. Sarah answered automatically, her mind already moving 3 steps ahead. She hung up and stared at her phone for a long moment. Then she canceled the appointment before it could even be officially scheduled. Because a new thought had taken root, cold and calculated and absolutely certain. She wasn't going to let them win. Not like this. Not without making them pay for every single moment of suffering they'd inflicted. Sarah opened her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. First, she needed information. She pulled up the contact information for the fertility clinic where they'd done their IVF treatments. Bright Horizons Reproductive Center had been their home away from home for 6 years. She knew every nurse by name, every corner of that building. They'd promised her confidentiality, careful handling of all biological materials, the highest ethical standards. And apparently, they'd let her husband switch embryos. Let him implant another woman's eggs into her body without her knowledge or consent. The fury that rose in her chest was white-hot, threatening to overwhelm the cold calculation she was trying to maintain. She forced it down, channeled it into focus. She would need proof, documentation, evidence that would stand up in court because she was absolutely certain this was going to court. Sarah created a new email address, one Donald didn't know about. Then she started searching for attorneys. Not divorce attorneys, though she'd need one of those two eventually. She needed someone who specialized in medical malpractice, reproductive rights, fraud. Someone who could navigate the complex legal territory of what had been done to her. As she scrolled through websites and reviews, reading about cases of embryo mix-ups and donor disputes, a pattern emerged. These cases were rare but not unheard of, and they were devastating when they happened. Her phone buzzed with a text from Donald. "Sorry I snapped earlier. Stressful day at work. How are you feeling?" The casual dismissiveness of it, the thin pretense of care, made her want to throw the phone across the room. Instead, she typed back a response that made her throat tight with suppressed rage. "Still not great but managing. Thanks for checking in. Love you." The lie tasted like poison, but she sent it anyway. She needed him to think everything was normal. Needed him to believe his foolish wife was still thrilled and ignorant while she built her case. Another text came through almost immediately. "Love you too. Don't wait up. Working late again." Working late. With Angela, presumably, continuing to plan Sarah's destruction while she carried their child in her body. The child they planned to tell her had died. The child they would steal from her to raise as their own happy family while Sarah grieved a fabricated death. Her hands clenched into fists, nails biting into her palms. The pain helped center her, pull her back from the edge of the breakdown threatening to consume her. She couldn't fall apart. Not yet. Not until she'd destroyed them as thoroughly as they'd tried to destroy her. Sarah opened a new document on her laptop and started typing. She needed to organize everything she knew, create a timeline, identify every person who would have been involved in this scheme. Donald, obviously. Angela, whoever she was. The fertility doctor who had performed the procedures. Dr. Marcus Chin, who had looked her in the eye month after month and promised they were doing everything possible to help her conceive. Had he known? Had he been complicit in this scheme? Or had Donald somehow manipulated the samples without the clinic's knowledge? Sarah needed to find out. She pulled up the clinic's website and navigated to the patient portal, logging in with credentials she hadn't used since their last successful embryo transfer 3 months ago. The portal gave her access to appointment histories, billing records, treatment notes. She started downloading everything, creating a digital paper trail of every single interaction they'd had with Bright Horizons. As she combed through the records, something caught her eye. An appointment she didn't remember. It was dated 8 months ago, scheduled under Donald's name alone for a consultation regarding advanced reproductive options. She'd been out of town that week, visiting her sister who just had her third baby. The irony of that timing wasn't lost on her. She'd spent that trip holding her newborn nephew, crying in her sister's bathroom about her own empty arms, while her husband was apparently plotting to use her body as an incubator for his mistress's child. Sarah picked up her phone again, this time calling a number she'd found during her attorney search. Miranda Lopez, a lawyer who specialized in reproductive fraud and medical malpractice. The firm's website had featured a case strikingly similar to her own. A woman who discovered her ex-husband had tampered with fertility treatments. That woman had won a 7-figure settlement. Sarah wasn't interested in the money, though she supposed it would help rebuild the life she was about to demolish. What she wanted was justice. She wanted to watch Donald's face when his entire world came crashing down around him. The receptionist who answered was professional and efficient, and within minutes Sarah had an appointment scheduled for the following morning. She was told to bring all documentation, medical records, and any evidence of the fraud. Evidence. Sarah's mind raced. The phone call had been recorded automatically by her phone's call logging system. But would that be enough? She needed more. She needed Donald to confess again, this time in a way that couldn't be disputed or explained away. Her laptop pinged with an email notification. She'd set up an alert for her bank accounts, something she'd started doing months ago when she noticed strange withdrawals Donald couldn't quite explain. Another $2,000 had just been transferred from their joint savings to an account she didn't recognize. Sarah opened their banking app and started scrolling through months of transactions. The pattern was there once she knew what to look for. Regular transfers, always just under the amount that would trigger a fraud alert, always to the same external account. She did the math and felt sick all over again. Over the past year, Donald had siphoned nearly $40,000 from their accounts. Money they'd borrowed from her parents for IVF treatments. Money she'd saved from years of working overtime at her marketing job. Money that was supposed to be for their future, their family, their child. And he'd been spending it on Angela. Sarah took screenshots of everything, backing them up to a cloud drive Donald didn't have access to. She created a hidden folder on her laptop, password protected, where she began compiling her evidence. The call recording, the bank statements, the medical records, the suspicious appointment. It was a start, but she needed more. She needed to know who Angela was. The name alone wasn't enough. Sarah opened social media and started searching, cross-referencing with Donald's friends list, his workplace connections, recent photos he'd been tagged in. It didn't take long. Angela Westbrook, 28 years old, nearly a decade younger than Sarah. She worked at Donald's company, in the marketing department on a different floor. Her profile was public, filled with carefully curated photos of exotic vacations, expensive restaurants, designer clothes. The life of someone without financial burdens or responsibilities. Someone who had never sacrificed anything for anyone. Sarah clicked through photo after photo, studying this woman who had agreed to steal her life. Angela was beautiful in that effortless way some women were, with long dark hair and the kind of slim figure Sarah's body had never quite achieved even before the hormones and stress of fertility treatments had added 20 pounds she couldn't lose. In several recent photos, Sarah could see a familiar watch on the wrist of whoever was taking the picture. Donald's watch, the one she'd given him for their 5th anniversary. He'd been documenting his affair in plain sight, and she'd never noticed. The rage that surged through her was so intense it made her dizzy. She closed the laptop before she could do something stupid like leave a comment or send a message. She needed to stay invisible, needed them to keep believing she was clueless. Sarah stood and walked to the bedroom she'd shared with Donald for 7 years. His side of the closet was immaculate as always, suits arranged by color, shoes in perfect rows. She started searching methodically, checking pockets, looking in shoe boxes, running her hands along the top shelf where he kept old electronics. In the back of his sock drawer, she found a second phone. A cheap prepaid smartphone he'd hidden under winter clothes he wouldn't need for months. Her hands trembled as she powered it on, half expecting it to be password protected. But Donald, in his arrogance, hadn't bothered. The phone opened immediately, and Sarah found herself staring at months of text conversations between her husband and his mistress. The content made her want to vomit again. Love confessions, explicit photos, detailed discussions of their plan. And there, in a conversation from 6 months ago, the smoking gun she needed. Angela had texted, "Are you sure Dr. Chun will do this? Switching the embryos seems risky." Donald's response was chilling in its confidence. "He owes me from that incident last year. He'll do it or lose everything. Besides, the payment I promised him should make any ethical concerns disappear. Sarah will never know. She's too desperate for a baby to question anything." Sarah took photos of everything with her own phone, her hands shaking so badly she had to retake several shots. Dr. Chun had been involved, had been paid off or blackmailed into participating in this scheme. The betrayal went deeper than she'd imagined. The doctor she trusted with her most vulnerable hopes had violated that trust for money or to cover up some unknown incident. She wanted to scream, to break things, to call Donald right now and tell him she knew everything. Instead, she carefully powered down the phone and returned it exactly where she'd found it. She had evidence now, substantial, damning evidence. But she needed more time, needed to secure her own future before she blew their lives apart. Sarah went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face, studying herself in the mirror. She looked terrible, dark circles under her eyes, skin pale and drawn, her whole body seeming to sag under the weight of what she'd learned. But underneath the exhaustion, she could see something else, a hardness that hadn't been there before, a determination that felt like steel forming in her spine. The baby kicked, just a flutter, barely noticeable, but unmistakable. Sarah's hand moved to her stomach instinctively, and for a moment the anger faltered. This child, this innocent life growing inside her, had become a pawn in a game it hadn't asked to play. Angela's biological child. The thought should have made her hate it, should have made her want nothing to do with this pregnancy. But instead, Sarah felt a fierce protectiveness surge through her. This baby was a victim too, deserved better than the people who had created it, deserved better than a mother who saw it as an accessory and a father who saw it as a tool for manipulation. An idea began to form. It was audacious, possibly insane, but it grew stronger with each passing second. Sarah grabbed her phone and called the clinic back, this time asking to speak directly with patient records. When the clerk answered, Sarah used her sweetest voice, the one she'd perfected over years of dealing with insurance companies and medical bureaucracies. She explained that she needed copies of all her medical records for a consultation with a specialist. Could they please send everything, including the laboratory reports from her embryo transfers? The clerk was happy to help. The records would be ready for pickup tomorrow, or they could email them if she preferred. Sarah chose email, providing her new secret address. After hanging up, she did something she'd been avoiding. She opened the calculator app and started doing math. Based on the timeline of the embryo transfer, her conception date, and the normal gestation period, she calculated when this baby would be born. 4.5 months from now. 4.5 months to build an unbreakable case, to protect herself legally and financially, to ensure that when Donald tried to tell her the baby had died, she would be ready. Sarah opened her laptop again and started researching custody law, specifically in cases of surrogacy disputes. What she found was complicated but potentially favorable. If she could prove that the embryo transfer had been done without her informed consent, that she'd been tricked into acting as a gestational carrier, she might have a case for retaining custody despite not being the biological mother. But it would be a battle, one that would require expert legal help and ironclad evidence. She added it to her growing list of things to discuss with Miranda Lopez tomorrow. The front door opened downstairs. Sarah's heart leaped into her throat as she heard Donald's footsteps in the hallway. She quickly closed all the incriminating tabs on her laptop, pulling up a pregnancy forum instead. Some innocuous discussion about nursery colors and baby names. The laptop screen showed exactly what an excited, expectant mother would be researching. She forced her face into a neutral expression, wiping away any trace of the fury and betrayal churning inside her. When Donald appeared in the doorway of their bedroom, She managed what she hoped looked like a tired smile. "You're home earlier than I expected," she said, keeping her voice light despite the acid taste in her mouth. Looking at him now, knowing what she knew, felt like staring at a stranger wearing her husband's face. How had she never seen it before? The coldness in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. The way his smile never quite reached those eyes anymore. The distance he'd been creating for months that she'd attributed to stress. "Finished up sooner than planned," Donald said, loosening his tie. The same tie she'd given him for Christmas. Everything felt tainted now. Every gift and gesture reframed through the lens of his betrayal. "How are you feeling? Any better?" The concern in his voice was so practiced, so convincingly false that Sarah wanted to laugh. Or scream. Instead, she placed a hand on her stomach in what she knew was the expected gesture. "A little better. The nausea comes and goes. I was just looking at nursery ideas. I know it's early, but I can't help getting excited." She watched his face carefully as she said it, looking for any crack in his mask. There was nothing. He smiled, walked over and pressed a kiss to her forehead that made her skin crawl. "That's great, honey. I'm glad you're feeling hopeful." Hopeful. What a choice of word. She was carrying his mistress's baby, and he was glad she felt hopeful about it. The audacity was breathtaking. "Have you eaten?" Donald asked, already moving toward the closet to change clothes. "I can order something if you're hungry."
I'm okay, Sarah lied.
She was starving, actually, but the thought of sitting across from him at their dining table, pretending everything was normal, made her want to be sick again. "I had soup earlier. You go ahead if you want something." He nodded, pulling out casual clothes. As he changed, Sarah caught sight of scratches on his back. Faint but unmistakable. Fresh. Angela's work, no doubt. The evidence of his afternoon activities literally written on his skin. He didn't even have the decency to hide it, probably assuming his foolish wife would never look closely enough to notice. Sarah turned away, afraid her expression would give her away. She needed to maintain this performance for months. The thought was exhausting. That night, she lay beside him in their bed, listening to him sleep, and planned her next moves. Tomorrow she would meet with the attorney and find out exactly what legal options she had. She would get the medical records from the clinic and look for any discrepancies or evidence of Dr. Chen's involvement. She would open a separate bank account Donald didn't know about and start moving money to protect herself financially. And she would continue playing the role of the excited, oblivious pregnant wife while she systematically dismantled the trap they'd set for her. Sleep didn't come. How could it? Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Donald's voice on that phone call. "Foolish woman. Surrogate tool. The baby died." She would make him regret every single word. Around 3 in the morning, Sarah slipped out of bed and went downstairs to her laptop. She spent the next 2 hours documenting everything she could remember from the past year. Every late night Donald had claimed was work. Every unexplained expense. Every time he'd been distant or cruel or dismissive. The pattern was clear now. This hadn't been a sudden decision. He'd been planning this for a long time, probably since he met Angela. Maybe longer. The sun was rising when Donald found her still at the kitchen table, surrounded by notes and her laptop. She quickly minimized the windows, pulling up a pregnancy app instead. "Couldn't sleep," she explained, forcing a yawn. "The baby's been active. I think I felt real kicks this time, not just flutters." Donald poured himself coffee, barely glancing at her. "That's nice. I have an early meeting, so I need to head out soon." An early meeting. With Angela, probably. Planning the next phase of their scheme while Sarah sat at home carrying their child. She nodded, playing her part. "Okay. Will you be home for dinner?" "Probably late again. Don't wait up." The same words as yesterday. The same lies. Sarah watched him leave, watched his car pull out of the driveway, and then she grabbed her own keys. She had an appointment with Miranda Lopez in 2 hours, and she needed to stop by the clinic first to pick up those medical records. The building that housed Lopez's law office was modern and sleek, all glass and steel in the business district downtown. Sarah sat in the waiting room, a thick folder of documents clutched in her lap, trying to control her breathing. This was real now. She was actually doing this. Miranda Lopez was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an air of competence that immediately put Sarah at ease. She listened without interruption as Sarah told her story, starting with the years of failed fertility treatments and ending with yesterday's devastating phone call. When Sarah finished, she felt wrung out, exhausted from reliving it all. Miranda had been taking notes, and now she looked up with an expression of carefully controlled anger. "What your husband and this doctor did is illegal on multiple fronts," Miranda said, her voice crisp and professional. "Reproductive fraud, medical malpractice, conspiracy, potentially embryo theft depending on how they obtained Angela's eggs. The consent violations alone are staggering. But Sarah, I need to be honest with you about something. This is going to be a difficult case. The laws around reproductive technology are complex and vary by state. And there's the question of the child." Sarah's hand moved protectively to her stomach. "What about the child? If Angela is the biological mother, she could potentially claim parental rights. Even though the pregnancy was achieved through fraud, even though you're the one carrying and birthing this baby, biology still matters in custody cases. We'll need to fight hard to establish that you have rights as the gestational carrier, especially since you were deceived. It's not impossible, but it won't be easy." The words landed like blows. Sarah had known this would be complicated, but hearing it stated so bluntly made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "What if," she said slowly, an idea forming even as she spoke, "what if the embryo transfer didn't actually work the way they planned? What if there was a mistake?" Miranda's eyes sharpened. "What do you mean?" "The clinic has had issues before. I remember reading about a lawsuit a few years ago, something about mislabeled samples. What if, in trying to do this illegal embryo switch, they made an error? What if the wrong embryo was transferred?" Sarah pulled out her phone, showing Miranda the text messages she'd photographed from Donald's burner phone. "Look at this. Angela asks if Dr. Chun will really do it. Donald says the switching seems risky. What if it was so risky that something went wrong?" Miranda leaned forward, reading the texts carefully. "You're suggesting we request genetic testing to confirm biological parentage?" Sarah nodded. "If I'm not the biological mother, that's something Donald and Angela will eventually discover anyway when the baby is born. But if there was a mistake, if this baby is actually mine..." She let the sentence hang. Miranda was already nodding, understanding blooming across her face. "If the baby is biologically yours, then everything changes. Donald's plan falls apart. He can't claim the child. Angela has no rights, and we have crystal clear evidence of attempted fraud." She started typing rapidly on her computer. "We need to get you tested immediately. Do you have any samples from your original egg retrievals? Any genetic material on file at the clinic?" "They keep everything for at least 10 years, Sarah confirmed. "It's part of their standard protocol. They have my eggs, my genetic profile, all of it." "Perfect. Here's what we're going to do." Miranda pulled out a legal pad and started sketching out a strategy. "First, we get you tested. Amniocentesis can give us fetal DNA that we can compare to your genetic markers. Yes, there's a small risk, but given the circumstances, I think it's warranted. Second, we start building the fraud case against your husband and Dr. Chun. These text messages are gold, but we need more. Third, we secure your financial assets. I want you to open accounts in your name only, document every penny in your joint accounts, and start protecting yourself from any attempts he might make to drain your resources." Sarah was writing everything down, her hand cramping as she tried to keep up. "What about Angela? Does she face charges too?" "Absolutely. She knowingly participated in reproductive fraud. We'll go after her civilly at minimum, and depending on what the district attorney thinks, possibly criminally." Miranda paused, studying Sarah with something that might have been admiration. "I have to tell you, most people in your situation would be falling apart. You're incredibly composed for someone who just discovered this level of betrayal." Sarah looked up from her notes. "I'm not composed.
I'm furious. I'm devastated.
I've cried so much in the past 24 hours that I didn't think I had any tears left. But I'll be damned if I let them destroy me. They think I'm weak, that I'm just a tool they can use and discard. I'm going to prove them wrong. Good, Miranda said firmly, because this is going to be a war, and you need to be ready for it. Your husband will fight back. He'll lie, manipulate, try to paint you as unstable or vindictive. Are you prepared for that? Sarah thought about the past 6 years. The injections, the procedures, the emotional roller coaster of hope and despair. The way she'd sacrificed her career advancement to focus on fertility treatments. The friendships that had faded because she couldn't bear to attend another baby shower, couldn't smile through another pregnancy announcement. The parts of herself she'd given up, piece by piece, in pursuit of motherhood. And Donald had watched it all, had held her through the worst of it, all while planning to steal everything from her. I'm ready, she said, and meant it. Miranda spent the next hour walking Sarah through the legal process. They would file for divorce, but strategically, waiting until they had all their evidence compiled. They would request a restraining order if Donald became threatening. They would pursue criminal charges against Dr. Chan and potentially Donald for fraud, conspiracy, and medical malpractice. The clinic itself would likely face massive liability. And depending on the genetic testing results, they would either fight for custody rights as a gestational carrier or, if the baby was Sarah's biological child, go for full custody with Donald getting supervised visitation at best. One more thing, Miranda said as Sarah prepared to leave. Don't confront him. I know you want to. I know you want to throw all of this in his face and watch him squirm. But we need him to keep thinking you're clueless. The longer he believes his plan is working, the more evidence we can gather. Can you do that? Can you go home and pretend everything is normal? Sarah nodded, though the thought made her sick. I can do it. I have to. For this baby, if nothing else. She placed her hand on her stomach again, feeling another small flutter. This child didn't ask for any of this. Whoever's DNA it carries, it deserves better than the people who created this situation. The genetic testing was scheduled for 3 days later. In the meantime, Sarah moved through her life like an actress in a play, hitting all her marks, delivering her lines with practiced precision. She smiled at Donald over breakfast. She texted him sweet messages during the day. She listened with feigned interest when he told her about his work, knowing every word was probably a lie. At night, she lay beside him in the dark and mentally recited the evidence she was building, using it to fuel her determination instead of giving in to despair. She also started documenting everything with her phone. When Donald claimed he was working late, she took screenshots of his location if his phone's GPS was on. When money disappeared from their accounts, she photographed the transactions. She even set up a small security camera in their bedroom, hidden in a picture frame, after finding more evidence of his affair. Text messages on the burner phone that detailed when Angela would come over while Sarah was out. The audacity of it was staggering. He was bringing his mistress into their home, into their bed, while his pregnant wife ran errands. The day of the amniocentesis arrived. Sarah had told Donald she had a regular prenatal checkup and he'd barely looked up from his phone when she mentioned it. She drove to a different medical facility, one Miranda had recommended, where the staff had been briefed on the sensitive nature of the situation. The procedure itself was nerve-wracking. A long needle inserted through her abdomen to extract amniotic fluid. The risk of miscarriage was small but real, but Sarah needed to know the truth, needed to understand exactly what Donald and Angela had done to her. Results should be back in about a week, the genetic counselor told her as Sarah rested after the procedure. We'll compare the fetal DNA to your genetic markers from the samples the fertility clinic provided. Are you sure you want to know? Some people prefer not to find out until after birth. I need to know now, Sarah said firmly. I need to know what I'm dealing with. The counselor nodded sympathetically. She probably thought Sarah was worried about genetic disorders or abnormalities. She had no idea Sarah was trying to determine if her entire pregnancy was based on a lie. The waiting was excruciating. Sarah threw herself into research, learning everything she could about reproductive fraud cases. She discovered she wasn't alone. There were other women who had been deceived by partners or doctors, who had carried pregnancies under false pretenses. Some had won their cases. Others had lost, bound by biological connections they couldn't override legally. She also hired a private investigator, a woman named Rachel Chin who specialized in infidelity cases. Rachel was thorough and discreet. Within 2 days, she had photographic evidence of Donald and Angela together, leaving his office building holding hands, kissing in the parking garage, entering a hotel room together during what should have been Donald's lunch break. The photos made Sarah's stomach turn, but she added them to her growing file of evidence. Every piece was another nail in Donald's coffin. On the 5th day of waiting, Donald came home with flowers. Roses, Sarah's favorite, though he'd forgotten that detail and brought her carnations instead. "I've been working so much lately," he said, presenting them with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I wanted to do something nice. How about we go out to dinner this weekend? Celebrate the baby?" The baby. His mistress's baby. The baby he planned to steal. Sarah took the flowers and manufactured a delighted smile. "That sounds wonderful. I'd love that." She put the carnations in a vase, wondering if Angela had suggested this gesture. Was she coaching Donald on how to keep his wife placated? The thought added another layer of violation to everything else. They were working together to manipulate her, probably laughing about how easy she was to fool. Dinner that weekend was at an upscale Italian restaurant where they'd celebrated their anniversary 2 years ago. Sarah ordered carefully, avoiding anything that might upset her pregnancy-sensitive stomach, while Donald drank wine and talked about a promotion he was hoping for at work. She listened and nodded and asked appropriate questions, all while thinking about the attorney meetings she'd had that week, the financial accounts she'd opened in secret, the evidence that was piling up in her favor. "You seem distracted," Donald said halfway through the meal. Sarah's attention snapped back to him. Had she slipped? Let her mask drop for a moment? She forced a laugh. "Sorry, the baby's been kicking a lot today. It's distracting, but in a good way. I can't stop thinking about what it'll be like when we finally meet our little one." Our little one. The words tasted like ashes. Donald reached across the table to take her hand, and Sarah let him, suppressing the urge to yank away. His touch felt like a violation now. Everything about him felt wrong, tainted, dangerous. "I can't wait either," he said. "It's going to change everything." He had no idea how right he was. The genetic testing results came back on a Tuesday morning. Sarah was alone in the house when Miranda called. "Are you sitting down?" the attorney asked, and Sarah's heart began to race. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. She sank onto the couch, one hand pressed against her racing heart, the other clutching the phone. "Just tell me. The baby is yours, Sarah. Biologically, genetically, completely yours. Whatever Donald and Dr. Chun tried to do, it didn't work. The embryo they transferred was your egg fertilized with Donald's sperm. You are this baby's mother in every sense of the word." The world seemed to stop. Sarah couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what she was hearing. "Are you sure? There's no mistake." "No mistake. We had them run the tests twice to be absolutely certain. The DNA match is conclusive. This is your biological child." Miranda's voice was gentle but firm, giving Sarah time to absorb the information. "Do you understand what this means?" Sarah understood. It meant Donald's plan had failed spectacularly. It meant Angela had no claim to this baby whatsoever. It meant everything they'd done, all the lying and manipulation and cruelty, had been for nothing. But more than that, it meant the baby she was carrying, the child she'd been trying so hard not to bond with because she thought it belonged to someone else, was actually hers. Her miracle, her daughter or son, the child she'd been trying to conceive for 6 years. The tears came then, unstoppable, a release of tension and fear and relief so powerful it shook her entire body. She was crying so hard she could barely speak. "Miranda, I need to know. What happens now? What are our next steps? Now we go on the offensive. We have everything we need. The fraud, the attempted embryo theft, the conspiracy, all of it. And we have proof that you are the biological mother, which gives you unquestionable rights to this child. Donald has played himself. When that baby is born, he's going to try to tell you it died. Instead, you're going to have security remove him from the hospital, hand him divorce papers, and press charges. How does that sound?" It sounded like justice. It sounded like everything Sarah had been working toward. But there were still months to go. Months of maintaining her act, of pretending to be the foolish wife Donald thought she was. "I can do this," Sarah said, wiping her eyes. "I can keep playing along. But Miranda, I want more than just to catch him in the act. I want him to feel exactly what he tried to make me feel. I want him to understand what he's lost. Then we'll make sure he does. I'm going to start drafting the divorce papers. We'll include full custody, a restraining order, and a demand for repayment of all marital assets he's stolen. We'll also be filing a criminal complaint against Dr. Chun and pushing for the medical board to revoke his license. Your husband chose the wrong woman to betray." The next 3 months were the longest of Sarah's life. Every day was a performance, every interaction with Donald a test of her acting abilities. But she had a secret weapon now. She knew the baby was hers. When the morning sickness continued to plague her, when her body ached and swelled, when the fatigue was so overwhelming she could barely function, she reminded herself that this was all for her child. Her daughter, as she'd learned at the anatomy scan Donald hadn't bothered to attend because he'd claimed an important meeting. Sarah documented everything. She recorded conversations where Donald discussed the baby with feigned enthusiasm, while she knew he was planning to tell her it had died. She saved every text message between him and Angela that the private investigator managed to intercept through legal surveillance methods. She photographed every unexplained charge on their credit cards. Every late night he came home smelling of unfamiliar perfume. Every lie he told about his whereabouts. The evidence file grew thicker by the day. Angela remained blissfully unaware that their scheme had failed. Sarah had seen the texts where Donald assured her everything was going according to plan, where Angela complained about having to wait to hold her baby, where they discussed nursery themes and baby names, planning a future with Sarah's biological child. The delusion was almost impressive. They'd constructed an entire fantasy built on fraud and cruelty, and they genuinely believed it would work. At 7 months pregnant, Sarah's body was obviously changed. Her belly was large and round, the baby active and strong inside her. She'd felt every kick, every roll, every hiccup, and each movement strengthened her resolve. This child was counting on her. She couldn't afford to fall apart or give in to the fear that sometimes threatened to overwhelm her in the quiet moments. Donald had become even more distant as her due date approached. He spent most nights claiming to work late, though the private investigator confirmed he was actually at Angela's apartment across town. Sarah used his absences to prepare. She'd packed bags and hidden them at her sister's house. Important documents, copies of all her evidence, clothes and essentials for herself and the baby. She'd opened a separate bank account and quietly transferred money in amounts small enough not to trigger alerts. She'd consulted with Miranda about the timing of everything. They would wait until the baby was born, wait until Donald tried to execute his cruel plan, and then they would strike. The contractions started on a Wednesday evening. Sarah was alone in the house when her water broke, and for a moment panic threatened to overwhelm her careful planning. This was it. This was the moment everything would come to a head. She called Miranda first, then her sister, and only after both of them confirmed they were on their way did she call Donald. He answered on the 4th ring, Angela's laughter audible in the background. "The baby's coming," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady despite the pain of another contraction. "My water broke. I'm heading to the hospital." There was a pause, muffled conversation on his end. Then Donald's voice, suddenly concerned and attentive. "I'm on my way." "Which hospital?" "Don't worry, honey. Everything will be okay." The endearment made her skin crawl. She gave him the name of the hospital and hung up, then immediately called security at that same hospital. Miranda had arranged for a police presence, officers who understood the situation and would be standing by. Everything was in motion now. Labor was long and difficult. Sarah had opted for an epidural, needing to stay clear-headed for what was coming. Her sister held her hand through the contractions, whispering encouragement and promises that everything would be okay. Miranda was there too, stationed outside the delivery room with a briefcase full of legal documents and 2 police officers. Donald arrived an hour into labor, playing the concerned husband perfectly. He held Sarah's hand, dabbed at her forehead with a cool cloth, murmured soothing words that she knew were meaningless. "You're doing great," he said during a particularly intense contraction. "Just a little longer and we'll meet our baby. Our baby. Not Angela's baby. Not the baby he planned to steal." Sarah looked at him through the haze of pain and exhaustion and saw him clearly for perhaps the first time. He wasn't handsome or charming anymore. He was pathetic. A weak, cruel man who had tried to use her body and break her spirit, and who had no idea he'd already lost. The baby was born just after midnight. A daughter, 7 pounds and 3 ounces, with a healthy set of lungs that announced her arrival to the entire floor. The nurse placed her on Sarah's chest, and the rush of love was instantaneous and overwhelming. This was her child, her daughter, the baby she'd fought for, suffered for, nearly lost hope of ever having. The infant had Donald's nose but Sarah's eyes, and she was absolutely perfect. "She's beautiful," Donald said, and there was genuine emotion in his voice. For a moment, Sarah almost felt sorry for him. He was looking at his biological daughter, a child he would never get to know, never get to raise. But then she remembered the phone call, the cruel words, the months of deception. Any sympathy evaporated. The nurse took the baby to clean her up and perform the necessary checks. Donald followed, his phone out, presumably texting Angela with updates. Sarah watched him go, then looked at her sister and nodded. It was time. Miranda entered the room with the police officers. Donald turned, confusion crossing his face when he saw them. "What's going on? Is something wrong?" Sarah sat up in the hospital bed, exhausted but triumphant. "Everything's fine, Donald. In fact, things are about to get much clearer. Officers, this is my husband. He's been planning to tell me our daughter died so he could steal her and raise her with his mistress. He bribed a doctor to switch embryos during IVF, committed reproductive fraud, and has been stealing money from our accounts for over a year." The color drained from Donald's face. He looked from Sarah to the officers to Miranda, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Sarah, what are you talking about? Have the medications made you confused?" "Officers, my wife just gave birth. She's not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years," Sarah said. Her voice was steady, cold, absolutely certain. "I know everything, Donald. I've known for months. I heard you on the phone with Angela planning all of this. I have recordings, text messages, bank statements, testimony from witnesses. And I have genetic testing proving that this baby is mine, not Angela's. Whatever you and Dr. Chun tried to do, it failed. This is my daughter, and you will never touch her." Miranda stepped forward, handing Donald a thick envelope, divorce papers, custody documents, and a restraining order. "You're also being charged with attempted fraud, conspiracy, and theft. Dr. Chun has already been arrested. Angela Westbrook is being served papers at her apartment as we speak. I'd suggest you get yourself a very good lawyer, Mr. Collins." Donald's face went through a series of expressions. Shock, denial, anger, and finally something that might have been fear. "You can't do this. That's my daughter. I have rights." Sarah laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. "Rights? You have no rights. You tried to use me as an incubator for another woman's child, planned to tell me my baby died, and thought you'd get away with it because you believed I was too stupid to figure it out. You were wrong. About all of it." The officers moved forward. "Sir, you need to come with us. We have questions about your involvement in this case." Donald tried to argue, his voice rising. He looked at Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read. Betrayal, maybe, as if he was the victim here, as if she'd done something wrong by discovering his scheme and protecting herself. "Sarah, please, you can't do this. We can talk about this. I love you." "No, you don't," Sarah said quietly. "I don't think you ever did. But that doesn't matter anymore. Officers, please remove him from this room. I don't want him near my daughter." They escorted Donald out, his protests echoing down the hallway. Sarah watched him go, feeling nothing but relief. The man she'd thought she married, the partner she'd believed would stand by her through anything, had never really existed. She'd been in love with an illusion, and now the illusion was shattered. The nurse returned with the baby, now clean and swaddled in a pink blanket. She placed the infant in Sarah's arms, and Sarah looked down at her daughter's face, seeing nothing but possibility and hope. "Hello, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'm your mom, and I promise you, I will protect you from anything and anyone who tries to hurt you. You're safe now. We both are." Her sister squeezed her shoulder. Miranda smiled from the doorway, and Sarah held her daughter close, feeling the weight of the past months finally lift from her shoulders. The legal battle that followed was brutal but brief. With the overwhelming evidence Sarah had compiled, Donald had no defense. He was convicted of fraud and conspiracy, sentenced to 18 months in prison. Dr. Chun lost his medical license and faced his own criminal charges. The fertility clinic settled with Sarah for an undisclosed sum that would ensure her daughter's future was secure. Angela tried to claim emotional distress, but her lawsuit was thrown out when the judge reviewed her text messages showing willing participation in the scheme. Sarah was granted full custody of her daughter, whom she named Grace. Donald was allowed supervised visitation after his release, but he never showed up for a single appointment. Apparently, fatherhood wasn't as appealing when it came with consequences and responsibilities. Angela disappeared from their lives entirely, her reputation destroyed along with her career. Sarah heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved to another state, trying to rebuild far from the scandal. The house Sarah had shared with Donald was sold, and she bought a smaller place in a neighborhood with good schools and parks. She went back to work part-time, finding that her career hadn't suffered as much as she'd feared. If anything, her colleagues respected her strength in handling such a difficult situation. Grace grew into a happy, healthy toddler with her mother's determination and smile. Sarah never told her daughter the full story of her birth, but she would someday, when Grace was old enough to understand. For now, it was enough that they had each other, that they'd survived something that could have destroyed them both. On Grace's second birthday, Sarah stood in their backyard watching her daughter chase bubbles, laughing with pure joy. Her sister stood beside her, holding Sarah's newborn son. Yes, Sarah had found love again, had rebuilt her life in ways she never could have imagined during those dark months of discovery and planning. "You did it," her sister said softly. "You fought back and won." Sarah smiled, watching Grace's delighted face. "We did it, all of us." And as her daughter ran to her, arms outstretched, Sarah picked her up and held her close, grateful for every moment of the journey that had brought them here. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was theirs to write. And Sarah intended to fill it with nothing but love, truth, and the kind of strength that came from surviving the unthinkable. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to Urban Folks TV channel for more stories of courage and justice. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to fight back against betrayal? How did you find your strength? Let's support each other in the comments. And remember, you're stronger than you think. Thank you for watching.